I'm just going to dive right into some of the data we have. I always show this graph. This is essentially surface water temperatures at the Mid-Lake sampling station every July since 1988, 89. I started monitoring and working on Lake Hopatcong with Dr. Steve Souza. Back then, we were called Coastal Environmental Services, and my first year was like 1992, 93. So I look at this graph, and it almost encompasses my entire professional career in monitoring Lake Hopatcong. But what this is essentially showing is that there's been a statistically significant increase in the surface water temperatures at Lake Hopatcong. And even more important than this, we see a similar increasing trend in temperature in the shallow sections of the lake immediately over the sediments. And what that does is that means the algae that produce the HABs, the cyanobacteria, as well as the aquatic plants, can start growing sooner because of these warmer temperatures. So we just keep that in mind as we do our monitoring. This is just showing you temperature through the course of the growing season from essentially May through September, and it's showing that the lake becomes thermally stratified. So the brighter the red color, the warmer the temperature, and it's basically showing you that during the growing season, you have this separation of the surface waters versus the deep waters, and this is largely driven by differences in density. What that leads to is a depletion of dissolved oxygen in those deeper sections of the lake. That depletion of dissolved oxygen allows phosphorus to be liberated from the sediments. So when there's oxygen, phosphorus is tightly bound to iron. When there's no oxygen, that bond is broken, and then that phosphorus seeps up into the water column. The cyanobacteria, the bad algae, have gas vacuoles, which means they can move very quickly through the water column. So they can collapse those gas vacuoles, sink into the deeper waters, fuel up on that oxygen-rich water, and then create those gas vacuoles, float to the surface, and make those surface scums. So that internal phosphorus load, the load that's coming from the sediments, is what that alum treatment in 2024 really focused on. Most of our projects are around the watershed, and that's taking care of the external source, which is from stormwater and septic systems. The internal source is what's coming from those deep water sediments. This is showing you the average phosphorus concentration at Lake Hopatcong at the Mid-Lake sampling station. And you can see that in the 90s, we were exceeding the desired level of phosphorus a number of times in the 90s. What that does is when you have concentrations of total phosphorus at 0.03 milligrams per liter, where you see that red bar, that's enough to really stimulate a high amount of algae growth. So if you look on the right side of the screen, you can see, from like 2022 to 2024, the phosphorus concentrations were creeping up. And then from 2024 to 2025, they declined. And we're attributing that at least partially to the alum treatment that was done in October of 2024. Related to that, when the phosphorus concentrations go down, again, if you look at the far right side of the screen, you can see that since 2023, chlorophyll A concentrations have been on the decline. So chlorophyll A is a photosynthetic pigment that all algae possess. So when you measure chlorophyll A, you're essentially measuring the amount of algae in the water. And then this third slide is showing water clarity. And what we want for Lake Hopatcong is we want the water to be at least as clear as a meter. And how we measure this, and I'll show you in the next slide, a Secchi disc. It's an alternating black and white disc that you lower into the water. The deeper you can see the Secchi disc, the clearer the water, which means you have a less algae. And if you're at 1 meter, and a meter is about 3.3 feet, if your clarity is a meter or deeper, that's when most people say it looks acceptable for recreational use. When you're less than a meter, that's when people say the water looks a little brown, it looks a little turbid. I'm not sure about that. And again, if you look at from 2021 to about 2024, we were having a decline in clarity. And then last year we had an improvement. And again, we're attributing that at least partially to the alum treatment. And this is what a Secchi disc looks like, that little photo over to the right, that alternating black and white disc. So if you look at throughout the entire water column and the entire lake, and keep in mind that we have a total of 13 standard monitoring sites throughout the lake. In May, all of those sites were greater than a meter, which is good. Once we got to June, they were all greater than a meter except for Station 10, which is up in the northern cove area. That area tends to get turbid for a number of reasons. And then you can see once we got into July and August, a number of the stations were less than a meter. And then by the time we got to September, the number of stations that were less than a meter were on the decline. But when you look at these values, most of the turbid areas tend to be in the northern end or in Crescent Cove, which is Station 3. But I will show you some interesting data when we talk about Crescent Cove for 2025. We monitor for two types of cyanotoxins. They're called, the two we monitor for are called microcystins. That's the most common group of cyanotoxins typically found in freshwater systems. And then anatoxin A, which is a particularly nasty neurotoxin. So this is the data from 2024 in July. I just wanted to show this, that essentially, and these stations are very different. These aren't open water stations. These stations are taken directly from the shoreline, from beach areas, because that's where people have that direct contact. And you can see that we did have either negative or very low concentrations, and none of these concentrations were problematic when it comes to problems where you may want to post an advisory. So for example, microcystins, New Jersey's threshold is 2 parts per billion. You can see either there was no measured microcystin or the microcystin was less than 1 part per billion. And then there was one value of anatoxin A that was 0.4 part per billion. So very low and very negative. But I'm showing you the 2024 data because when you look at 2025 in July, they were all negative, which is good. When we look at August, here are the data from August of 2024 and August of 2025. So again, negative. And we typically monitor for these at the height of the summer season. So it's typically July and August that we do this monitoring. So 2025 was a very good year in terms of not having any of the measurable cyanotoxins that we typically monitor at Lake Hopatcong. So a few other water quality issues I want to mention. As we measure temperature and dissolved oxygen in 2025, we did have optimal brown trout habitat in May, June, and September. That optimal habitat was no longer present in July or August, but there was a limited amount of carryover habitat. So optimal habitat is the stuff where the brown trout would not be stressed. Carryover habitat means they can survive in it, but there may be a little bit of stress. And again, this is largely based on temperature and how much dissolved oxygen is available for those fish. As I mentioned, we did update the submerged aquatic vegetation survey for the lake. We try to do these surveys about once every 5 years just to see how the plant community is changing over the years and decades. But in addition to the standard survey, we actually collected plant samples and analyzed them for total phosphorus and total nitrogen. We did a similar study back in 2006, but we only did phosphorus. So this year we updated that information and we also measured for nitrogen. And the reason why we do that is so we can estimate how much nutrients are being removed from the lake during the harvesting events. So we know in 2025, there was 1,682 cubic yards of plants that were removed from the lake. Now, when you remove the plants, you're also removing some nutrients. And so doing that study where we analyzed the plant content for the nutrients, we estimated that the harvesting program removed about 760 pounds of phosphorus and a little over 16,000 pounds of nitrogen. And again, that's one of the values and the benefits of the harvesting compared to using some sort of aquatic herbicide. The herbicides, they can be very fast acting, and they can be cost effective. But when you're killing the plant, those nutrients go back into the water column and can fuel can fuel algae growth. When you're harvesting, you're actually removing the plant biomass, but you're actually removing nutrients as well. So I always call the harvesters, they're sort of internal BMPs or aquatic BMPs. So they have a value beyond just removing that plant material. I do want to go over some of the data for the alum treatment. Now, we just completed the project report for this, and this was submitted to the commission for their review. But I just want to point out some highlights, from the alum treatment. So the alum treatment was conducted in October of 2024. So 2025 was the first post-alum treatment year. And we did see some measurable benefits. First of all, the highest bottom water phosphorus concentration. And remember how I described that when we have no oxygen down there, this phosphorus is released from the sediments and it accumulates down there. And the more phosphorus that's down there, the more that's available for algae growth. Well, in 2025, the highest concentration over the growing season in the bottom was 0.17 milligrams per liter. Now, that was high, but it's substantially lower than what the high values were for the last previous 4 years. So if you look at the data that was collected from 2021 to 2024, those highest bottom water concentrations varied from 0.2 to almost 0.6 milligrams per liter. So we did have a substantial reduction in the amount of total phosphorus available. Then we also looked at soluble reactive phosphorus. So total phosphorus you can think of as food for the algae. The soluble reactive phosphorus is like candy. That's the stuff that the algae is going to take up right away. It's dissolved, it's inorganic, they can easily assimilate it. They don't they do not need any sort of additional energy to incorporate that SRP. So if you look at the bottom water concentrations of SRP in 2024, so this is before the alum was added, concentrations varied between 0.002 and 0.085, with a mean or an average concentration of 0.044. And again, this is in the bottom where you run out of oxygen. After the alum was added, the concentrations in the bottom varied between less than 0.001 and 0.021, with a mean or an average value of 0.008. So this was essentially a 82% reduction in the amount of soluble reactive phosphorus in the bottom water. And that's, again, due to the alum treatment. And then just a few other data points. So we also measure cyanobacteria cell counts. And I'll just give you the mean values. So the year before the alum was added, at Station 2, which is the Mid-Lake Sampling Station, the mean value of the cyanobacteria cells was about 114,000 cells per mil. The year after the alum was added, that mean value was 55,000 cells per mil. So that was essentially a 52% reduction in the cell counts from 2024 to 2025. So again, this data is really showing us that alum had a beneficial treatment, beneficial result in terms of improving water quality at Lake Hopatcong. I'll just very briefly go over this, but the second presentation I have goes into more detail with this. As part of the Army Corps project, we were evaluating innovative treatment strategies in shallow sections of the lake. One of them was an early season benthic application of an oxidizer, and this was added to the Crescent Cove section. Essentially, I just want to show you that the cell counts, if you look at that third point, there was a 62% reduction in cell counts from 2024 to 2025. And again, that was attributed to this oxidizing treatment. And again, I'll get into a little more detail on that in the second presentation. So, the conclusions for this one is essentially the alum treatment appeared to have a positive impact on the lake, reducing the lake's internal phosphorus load. Water clarity and elevated amounts of turbidity and algal biomass do still plague the lake from time to time, particularly in the northern end, which is why we continue to implement the watershed-based projects, as well as investigating ways of dealing with the algae in the lake themselves to continue to improve conditions in Lake Hopatcong. There were no detections of either of the two cyanotoxins during the July and August nearshore events. We will be giving an updated SAV survey, and Pat Rose, I believe, will be giving a brief presentation on the plant survey details at the next commission meeting. We're currently working on an analysis of the Army Corps ERDIC treatment data, and again, the second presentation, I'll get a little bit into that data. And then finally, I do want to say we are, working with the foundation and commission, looking for some potential sources of funding for some possible innovative selective dredging, particularly in the landing channel section of the lake. So that's what I have for the first presentation. I'm going to jump to the second one, and then I will be able to answer some questions. So let me just go to the second one. And as I'm going to the second one, I can mention that this was a presentation we had to give to the ERDIC division of the United States Army Corps. So ERDIC stands for Engineering Research and Development Center. They're the ones that awarded the project to us. And go right back to the beginning. Okay, so we had to give an update on the project. I can tell you that all of the field work has been completed. It was all completed last year. We're in the process of doing post monitoring. So as a matter of fact, we were just out there last week collecting sediment and water data to do some incubation studies. We have one last sampling event for all of the 6 sites that were in the study that will be done this summer, and then this project will be completed, and we'll have the report available hopefully by the end of this year for everyone to review. But I do want to give you some of the information that we provided ERDIC. So this is a map of Lake Hopatcong. Where you see those red areas, those were the sections that were considered for treatment. And what we're doing is we were evaluating innovative ways of either using existing and certified pesticides or compounds that are not considered pesticides. So this was something that we worked with not only with Army Corps, but we had to work with New Jersey DEP because the year that this was awarded was the same year that they just started their HAB management permits. So we had to get permits for that. So the one thing I do want to say is the first thing we did last year about this time was we collected water and sediment samples and we incubated them. And this is just showing you what the incubation looks like. And this is showing you the pre-incubation data. We want to compare the pre-treatment incubation data to the post-treatment incubation data. The reason why we're doing that is we're trying to identify, did these treatments have a positive benefit of reducing the amount of overwintering cyanobacteria cells over that sediment water interface? So that's just showing you some of that data. I'm going to show you data for the 2 early season treatments because that data has already been analyzed. We're still in the process of analyzing the data from the late summer fall treatments. So the 2 that were done in April of last year, one was Ashley Cove. This we did a standard copper treatment with a chelated copper product. But again, the difference is we didn't wait for a bloom to occur. Instead, we did one treatment of the copper product and not during the summer, but in the spring, and we did it over the sediment water interface. So trying to be proactive and knocking down that overwintering algae. And so if you look at these three graphs here, the one that says April 2022, it's showing you that the control and the treatment cell counts were about the same. These are called box plots, and each box sort of represents the any data that would be within 25 to 75% of that population of that number. If you look at the shaded line area, that's the median level. And so if you look at before the treatment was done, that's April 22nd. After the treatment was completed, you can see May and June. And if you look at the cell counts, if you look at those box plots, you can see that in the treatment area, not surprising, you see a decline in the cyanobacteria, which is what you would expect. But what we really want to find out is, did this translate into this year? So that's why we were out collecting additional data last week. So we're seeing that instead of waiting for a bloom to occur and then treating, can we be more proactive and prevent the bloom from developing in the first place, but also use a lot less product. We also used another algicide. This was in the Crescent Cove area, and this was an oxidizer. So this was not a conventional copper-based algicide. So this is an oxidizer. It breaks down the organic matter. And what's really interesting is, again, if you look at the box plots on the left for April, you can see that there's some overlap there between the control and the treatment. But then once we got into May and June, we did see a substantial reduction in the amount of cells in the treated area versus the control. So what this is telling us is that, doing this spring benthic application of this product really had a substantial benefit in the Crescent Cove section of the lake. And as a matter of fact, we did see it carry on for the entire growing season. And because we monitor Crescent Cove, it's one of our standard monitoring spots. So I'm showing this data. This is qPCR data. So what this is measuring is, it's measuring genes. And so the three box plots on the left show the total genes that you would need to have if you're a cyanobacteria. And so what's interesting is, it's another way of measuring cyanobacteria. So not surprising, you would expect, in the treated area for the cyanobacteria number of genes to decline, and they did. But what's really interesting, and some other scientists have seen this, and we don't quite know the mechanism for this, but if you look at the qPCR of the genes for producing the cyanotoxin microcystins, that when you treat it, not only is it reducing the amount of cyanobacteria, it reduces the amount of cyanobacteria that actually can produce the microcystins. So we're not only reducing, the cyanobacteria, we're really reducing the bad cyanobacteria, the ones that produce the cyanotoxin. So that was something that was really interesting and promising to see. This is just showing you, again, some more Crescent Cove data. So the figure on the left is showing that 2025, the number of cyanobacteria cells were low, particularly when you compare it to 2022 to 2023 and 2024. And then if you look at the graph over on the right, you're looking at 2023, 2024, 2025, and it's comparing Woodport Bay, which is up in the northern end of the lake, to Crescent Cove. And typically Crescent Cove has higher amounts of cyanobacteria than Woodport Bay, but in 2025, they were very similar. So again, just showing you that improvement in Crescent Cove. And then the last thing I'll say about Crescent Cove, and this is data that wasn't even collected by us, this is collected by volunteers who monitor for phycocyanin. And phycocyanin is a pigment that is almost exclusively produced by cyanobacteria. And so what they found was, in their monitoring in 2024, so they have two monitoring stations, and I'll just give you the mean values. So in 2024, before this oxidizing treatment occurred, their mean values were between 29 and 34. And then if you look at 2025, after that spring treatment of the oxidizer, the mean values were 11 and 15. So again, additional data showing that conditions improved in Crescent Cove. We also did some other treatments. So in Landing Channel, we did what's called a flock and lock assessment. Here we used a product called chitosan, and chitosan is essentially, it's ground up shellfish like shrimp, and the material is it's environmentally friendly, number one, and number two, it's known to be a good flocking agent. So we use that in combination with Utrizorb G, which is a bonding product. It uses lanthanum. It's clay-based, so it's binding the phosphorus. So we're flocking the cells out and locking the cells and the phosphorus. We did this treatment in late September, and you can see the rates there. And like I said, Pat is going through this data. The only data we have right now is from the qPCR. And again, this is a way of measuring cyanobacteria, but here we're measuring the number of genes. And you can see that before as well as after the treatment areas had lower amounts of cyanobacteria. So even if there was a shift in the amount of cyanobacteria afterwards, it looks like that did not occur. It looks like the treatment area still stayed lower than the control area, whether those products were added or not. We also did a flock and sink treatment, which was a combination of alum and Utrizorb G. So instead of using the chitosan, we used the alum. This was done in the Northern Cove, in the northern 47 acres. And that treatment was done in mid to late September. Just showing you some of the staging area and some of the application. And then the last two treatments we did was a Van Every Cove, which is called a kill and sink. Here we're using, again, another oxidizer called Green Clean. And then we use the Utrizorb G to sink the algal cells once they were affected by the Green Clean. And this occurred in early October. Showing you the photo, some of the action shots there. And then the last one is called Kill, Flock, and Sink. And this one, we were using Green Clean, the chitosan, and then the Utrizorb G. And this was done in early to mid-October. So like I mentioned, Pat is in the process of analyzing all this data. Matter of fact, he was going over a lot of doing the cell count analysis for these treatments. But again, the whole idea of this project was to evaluate innovative ways of trying to deal with HABs in nearshore areas, which can function very differently than HABs out in the open water. So this is just showing you what we're in the process, what this process is doing. So we did the treatments last year. We're evaluating the data. We'll do a cost-benefit analysis. And then once that report is complete, it will be available for everyone to review. Like I said, we did have some hurdles because, the same year that the project was awarded, DEP had a new permit program for HAB management. So we had to work with them to make sure that any product we wanted to use, that they approved of through that permit process. So that's what I have right now, what we're doing. We're looking to see if ERDIC may have some funding, like I mentioned before, for some potential innovative dredging projects. Like I mentioned, a lot of your cyanobacteria overwinter in the near shore sediments. So people are starting to look at, dredging as a way not only to deepen the water, to improve access, limit plant growth, but also to remove that habitat that's so beneficial for those overwintering cyanobacteria. So that's what I have. A lot going on at Lake Hopatcong, and I'll take any questions you have, and thank you for your time.
Hi, Fred. This is Alexandra Guido. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. So every slide pretty much said projects and studies, and you're looking into
Excuse me,
studies. So,
Alexandra. This is Donna from the Lake Hopatcong Foundation. We are going to be taking the questions that were in the chat first, and then we're going to open it up to questions from others. So I believe my
yeah,
coworker Caitlin has some questions in the chat already. Caitlin,
yeah, my question is in the chat. I was
okay,
just
so
reading it.
Caitlin's going to monitor those. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, there's three here. And in order, it's Rob, Alexandra, Lynn, and then I think Avery. Um, Alexandra, I think you were in the middle of reading yours, so if you want to finish reading your question, and then we can return and we can go back up to Rob. I think that'll work.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. Yeah, so every slide says project and every slide said studies. So, what studies are being done on the effects of children and people swimming in these active test areas? Because I recognize that during these treatment times, the employees that are doing the treatments have to wear full PPE. I've witnessed it, and it's also on your website.
Mhm.
So, given that you guys have to wear that full PPE when handling the concentrated products. My concern is for my question for you is what studies have you done short term and long term on these products being treated for people swimming in the water? Because I mean, it's aluminum, it's copper. I could say that it's having an effect on HAB, but what about people?
No, that's a good question. I mean, basically, these products are licensed and registered by both EPA and the New Jersey DEP. And how they get licensed for approved application is by having a lot of studies, a lot of ecotox studies. So there have been a huge amount of research and information on the impacts of the copper-based algicides, of the aluminum products. And as part of our permit process, we had to monitor, for example, dissolved aluminum, before and after the treatments. And I can tell you that the dissolved aluminum concentrations were consistently less than the detection limit, which was like, I think, 8.7 parts per billion. The drinking water value for aluminum is like 15 parts per billion. So, we, as part of the permit, we do have to do some monitoring. But these products are, it's number one, they have to be licensed by both EPA and DEP. Number two, they have to be applied by a certified applicator. So we are certified applicators. So yes, I do know there's been a lot of studies, a lot of ecotox studies on these products, and they're largely available. And you can also look at their MSDS sheets to see what they say. And you hit it right on the head. When you're dealing with a concentrated product, yes, you do have to wear the PPE. But once they're in the water, a lot of these products, when they're having when they're activated, they then settle down into the sediments. And aluminum is the second most common element in the Earth's crust. Alum is used in drinking water clarification. So there's been a lot of research and a lot of work on these products.
Right, and I do reference the studies that you say. You, I have read those studies, but my concern is long term environmental exposure to them. None of the studies include long term environmental exposure, and so now we're racking up years of you doing this treatment and years of us swimming in the lake. So there's
Well, so these have been one-time treatments. These I'm not doing the we are not doing these on a regular basis. These were being done to evaluate whether or not they're worth pursuing, in the future. So they've been done once, and they're not going to be done again unless someone decides to get a permit and do it. I mean, these were done to evaluate how this treatment works. I mean, other lakes have been using copper-based algicides, aquatic pesticides, aquatic herbicides for years, if not decades, to control nuisance weeds and algae. Hopatcong, they rely heavily on the harvesting for the plants. So it's not like we're dumping this stuff in on a regular basis, not at all.
I mean, I sit at Lake Forest Yacht Club and swim with my daughter, and on multiple occasions, the little boat went by with their hazmat suits spraying 10 feet away from my daughter. So my question is, if there is going to now be continued use in the future, you say there's not going to be, which is great because I think that this is just honestly, it's too much. And we're just an experiment at this point. Like Lake Hopatcong has become an experiment for this project, and it's a shame that I'm watching them in full PPE spray in front of my daughter. So if that's the case, it like there's got to be some sort of stronger warning. Hey, we're spraying today. You know, the kids shouldn't be swimming. But like we didn't get any of that. It was maybe a Facebook post last year. Like to me, this is a huge deal.
Well, I mean, I know. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have a question just to tack on to Alexandra's. Are there any use restrictions, such as swimming, for the treatments that you just talked about?
Well, no, for the application that was done, no, there wasn't. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, these products are like clarifiers, and we weren't using pesticides. The pesticides were the copper-based algicide at Ashley Cove and the oxidizer. And the oxidizers that were done at Van Every Cove and Great Cove, those oxidizers were done in October. So they weren't done during the swimming season. So that's one of the reasons, another reason why we pushed back the treatments that we did. You know, we did all of those later treatments in September and October. So,
So pushing it outside of swim season, it inherently means that there is a risk during swim season, or else you would just do it during swim season. Like why
no,
push it?
no,
Why
that's
push it then? If
be
it's so
well.
safe.
I can tell you why we pushed it is because we were waiting to get the permit. You know that there's two reasons. Number one, we were waiting to get the permit, and number two, the whole idea of this is trying to knock down that overwintering benthic layer of algae to see if it could be proactive. That's why we're going back out this year to resample those sediments to see if we can. We're not just trying to just kill the algae, we're trying to kill it right at that sediment water interface. That's where all the algae starts. So that's why we're evaluating that. So there were a couple reasons why we pushed it back.
And Alexandra, I just like to say that, and I see that there's some other questions coming up in the chat regarding notifications,
Mhm.
but please, you know, be aware that Princeton Hydro follows all the necessary guidelines through federal and state regulations to notify residents of when they are doing treatments. Can you talk to that a little bit, Fred?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we have to submit, you know, to local newspapers, notifications. We were at every commission meeting giving updates. So we had to post signs. So there are required notification processes that we went through. Now, certainly, you know, we did everything we could to make sure that we were complying with all that, but we were doing a number of the required activities to make sure that the community did know what we were doing.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll just allow Caitlin to go ahead and monitor the chat and continue so that I'm not holding up any questions. But it was a pleasure talking to you, Fred. I look forward to chatting with you via email to hopefully get some more clarification and better communication to the public on what you're doing to our backyards and when.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks, Alexandra. So top of the order is Rob Bond asking, is there a map available showing the station locations on the lake? And I think he's referring to the 13 standard monitoring sites. We were talking about turbidity.
Yes. And I'm pretty sure the commission does this. They post every year the water quality monitoring report. So we prepare a report, we submit it to the commission, and I believe, you know, Colleen posts that. That report every year has that map. It shows where all those locations are. The only stations it's not showing are the stations that are used for the cyanotoxin monitoring. And if you need that, I can provide that map as well.
And we also do post that on our website as well. For every year, you can go back several years and look at the water quality monitoring report, and the stations are in there for the regular monthly water quality monitoring.
All righty. Our next question comes from Lynn Fisher, and it says, can we talk about weeds and how the treatment affects weeds? As I believe PH said at a meeting last fall, that these treatments will increase weed growth. So how do we get the weeds to stop growing, as they kept us off the water for over 8 weeks last year? We do not have funding to even operate all the weed harvesters we own, so saying we cut the weeds is not responsive. And ditto on the question about safety for swimming and also for wave boats, question mark?
Okay.
Few
So for
things there.
weeds, so a couple things with the weeds. One is it's a lake. It's not a swimming pool. You're either going to have algae or you're going to have weeds because you have sunlight hitting the sediment. One thing's going to grow or the other. And if you have a lot of nutrients, particularly in the water column, you're going to get a lot of algae. If it's clear water, but you have a lot of nutrients in the sediment, you're going to get weeds. So of the two, I would rather deal with the weeds because the weeds don't produce the cyanotoxins. The weeds don't close the beaches. Now, the weeds are problematic, absolutely. And that's why the harvesting is so important. There are all kinds of aquatic contact and systemic herbicides. But again, for a couple reasons, the commission really focuses on the harvesting. The one is DEP will not pay to put the chemicals into the water. You know, unless you got something like a particularly nasty invasive species and you wanted to eradicate that and it was in one location, then you may want to use some type of systemic herbicide. But funding goes to the commission because it's harvesting, because you're removing it. You're right, the weeds can be problematic, and that's why we're looking for some of that funding, not only to do the projects in the watershed, but also to dredge. Because if you dredge, you're going to remove that algae habitat for the overwintering algae, but then also you're removing that nutrients that really, stimulates that plant growth. And the deeper the water, the less sunlight that hits the bottom. So unfortunately, you're going to have weeds. What we're trying to do is we're trying to find funding for these, near shore selective dredging operations to try to minimize that. But the harvesting is preferred, at least from a funding vehicle, over the use of the aquatic herbicides.
But could you just address, I know there was a lake in Connecticut that basically wiped out their weed population over the course of a couple years. Could you just talk a little bit about the implications of that and how it affects the lake ecosystem so people understand why we want the weeds? Not so many, but there's a balance.
and I can, you know what, Donna, I'll give you an example that I actually experienced because I was hired we were hired to do this lake down in Virginia, Holiday Lake, Lake Holiday, I'm sorry. And back then, they were having some major hab issues. And so I asked them, well, what happened beforehand? They said, well, we had some weeds and we decided to put in grass carp. And I asked them how many grass carp they put in. And when you're, first of all, you wouldn't be able to do this at Lake Hopatcong. But I want to make that point that Donna's making here of why you'd rather deal with the weeds. In that they had a weed problem, they decided to put in grass carp, and the consultant they had them put in 4 times more than they needed. So usually when you calculate how many grass carp to add, you do it per vegetated acre. They told them to do it by total acreage. So they literally put in 4 times more grass carp. The grass carp ate all the weeds. So sunlight, plenty of, grass carp poop, and they just had some record nasty habs. Now they're working to try to get weeds back because the grass carp are very difficult once they're in, they're very difficult to get out. So it's this balancing act. You want some weeds, you want some algae, but you don't want to go too far in either direction. But of the two, I would rather deal with the weeds than the algae. And again, that funding vehicle for New Jersey is what allows you to do that harvesting.
Okay, we have our next question is coming from, it simply says a Samsung user, but if I squint, it's a tiny picture. I think I recognize you, Avery. Hello. It says, any dredging plans for Northwood?
So, not that I know of, but I know it's high on the list. So a couple years back, we did an assessment of 23 bays and coves, and I know that area is pretty high on the need for dredging. So we're looking for funding of dredging, and historically it's been really difficult to try to get money for dredging. But sort of this window we're seeing into it is this dealing with overwintering halves. So depending on how the federal budget goes, and depending on if this line item remains for HAB mitigation, I would really like to pursue some selective dredging in multiple locations in Lake Hopatcong. And the window into that might be HAB mitigation.
I just want to follow up by saying that Avery quickly followed up with any treatments also in addition to dredging. Just want to say if there's any prioritized treatments for Northwood.
So
Oh no, we've frozen Fred.
Sorry,
we, as
guys.
Princeton Hydro, don't have any. I can't speak for the foundation or commission.
Our next question is a two-parter. We're going to try to get through the first part at least. We might have addressed this. This is from Evan Kurzman. Hi. Do you plan to notify lakefront or near residents in writing prior to any future treatments, given that these are happening in our backyard?
We're not doing any future treatments.
There we go. That might.
Can I
Yeah.
just, one thing. The commission, like, I know you notified via the commission, so if you're not doing any future treatments, obviously it doesn't matter. I assumed you might follow up, and the commission just doesn't post their meetings in a timely fashion, which I know isn't your fault, so it's almost impossible to get any information from a commission meeting. So I think it would just be best if you did do any future treatments to find another mechanism than through the commission. I don't know if that's what the DP allows or not, but that would be great. And then also one other thing about the weeds that you want over the algae. The weeds have always been the biggest problem in my 33 years on Lake Hopatcong, and the algae was only a problem 1 year, and it was the first year New Jersey monitored the algae. So I think the residents of the lake have a different opinion than your scientific opinion of many lakes. Here, the weeds have been our biggest issue, and I think that would be great to keep in mind when treating Lake Hopatcong.
No, I hear you with the weeds, but I can tell you, you do not want to turn into a green algae bowl. And I'm sorry, but it's not a swimming pool. You're not going to get clear water with no weeds and no algae. Something's going to grow. And
But
of the two, the weeds are easier to manage than you have a huge HAB out of control. And that's what we're trying to prevent.
I just want to point out, everybody, that we hit 8 o'clock and I've saved this chat in case we don't get to all the questions because there have been quite a bit, but I just noticed we're at the 8 o'clock mark.
So, Caitlin, just take one or two more questions just so we could see if we could wrap them up if there's only a couple left. Fred, if you don't mind.
Yeah, not at all.
Thank you.
Just scrolling quickly. Can you define the difference between dredging and hydro raking to remove organic material? That's from James Palmer.
Yeah, so dredging is really focusing on removing the combination of organic material and dirt. Hydro raking, you're focusing primarily on the organic matter. And when I say organic matter, usually like the root material. Typically, when we do hydro raking, we're focusing on removing like the large tubers and root systems of, say, a lot of your like water lilies and spatterdock. You're trying to get that stuff out. And the value to that is, yeah, it's slower than harvesting, But if you get those large root systems out, you can get multiple years of control with hydro raking. So hydro raking tends to be focusing more on just purely the organic material. Dredging, you're trying to get all that unconsolidated material out of there.
This one comes from Bernie Conlon. Are you still using nano bubblers in Crescent Cove?
So we have not used any nanobubble systems in Crescent Cove. I believe Crescent Cove has some type of aeration system. And I believe that was funded through one of the HAB demonstration grants to the borough. We did not do that. We did use nanobubble systems at some of the other beaches for some demonstration projects, but we did not do the Crescent Cove one.
Thanks, Fred.
Yep.
A lot of comments too. A lot of them saying keep up the great work. A lot of people saying some parts of the lake are clearer or cleaner than they've ever been. Some follow-ups to earlier questions. But like I said, I'm going to save this transcript in case we can address anything offline too. So thank you.
Fred, so I just have one quick question that you talked about when you talked about back in 2006 during a submerged aquatic vegetation study that Princeton Hydro was able to measure the amount of phosphorus from the weed harvesting removal. And the most recent SAV survey, you also are monitoring the amount of nitrogen removed from the lake. Why the change in the 20 years? Why are we measuring nitrogen now?
I'm actually kind of glad you brought that up. So in most freshwater systems, phosphorus is really what drives the algal growth. And usually more phosphorus means not only more algae, but more of the cyanobacteria. But over, I'd say, the last 10 years or so, and we've always known nitrogen is also very important. Nitrogen tends to be more important in marine and estuarine systems. Phosphorus tends to be more important in freshwater systems. But what they've been finding over the last 10 years, particularly for a lot of work up in the Great Lakes, is when you have more inorganic nitrogen, it allows the cyanobacteria to produce the cyanotoxins, because particularly that group microcystins, if you look at that molecule, it has a lot of requirements for nitrogen. So phosphorus will stimulate the growth. A lot of inorganic nitrogen will allow those cyanobacteria to produce those cyanotoxins, particularly the microcystins. So that's why we're looking at both. And a lot of the efforts and I say we as the community that have been focusing on, like the green infrastructure and, pumping out the septic systems, sewering, all these efforts really are removing phosphorus and nitrogen. So it is important that we focus on both of those nutrients.
Thank you, Fred.
Yep.
So, Kate, did we get through most of the chats there? We're about 5 minutes after the hour, so.
We did pretty well, yes.
So everyone, if there's any other questions that anyone has, one or two questions, Fred might share a couple more minutes of his time with us. And thank you again, Fred, for doing this for us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Does anyone else want to ask any other questions?
Hi, it's Nita. I just have a statement maybe he could clarify. So I hate to say when I was young in the 70s, but they used to treat the lake with something in the spring, pesticide, and you'd see big orange signs up, do not swim. We had no weeds. We had no weeds. I'm sure it was before I remember. And I want to say that lasted into the early 80s, at least, until they decided. I don't even know what it was. I was a kid, but I do remember the weeds. The weeds weren't a problem then, and I'm sure whatever it was some toxic mess. But would you know what they treated the lake with back then?
Yeah, that's a good question, and should dig into that and find out what that is. I know a lot of the previous compounds were arsenic based. I have no idea if that's what it was. I just don't know. But I know some of the past products that have been used for weed and aquatic plant and algae control, there were arsenic-based products and there were other products, but I honestly don't know what they were using back then.
Because I remember after they stopped, we're on the Bertrand Island on the state park side, that the weeds, the year they stopped doing that, or the second year, the weeds were actually coming above the water in the deep section. It was crazy. And people were trying to, well, my family has a lot of longevity into it. So we used to joke and say whatever it was, you know, everybody lived into their 90s. But I always wondered what they used that kept the lake. Well, that's it. The chemicals that nobody wants anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. I honestly don't know.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Great presentation. Great work too.
Thank you.
Marty Kane has his hand raised in the corner there. Marty, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to point out, as far as the what was done historically, it actually used to spray it from helicopters and airplanes. Cliff London was on, I'm sure remembers it as a kid, and you actually had to stay out of the lake for 3 to 5 days in the summer, and there was a strong reason they stopped doing that was because of what the ultimate effects on the lake were with that. As far as weeds go, our Eurasian milfoil was first located and designated as a problem in the 1950s. So it's not like, it's just something that came about recently. We've been living it for quite some time. It's just really to find the best way to control it.
Yeah, no, I think that what you guys are doing is great because years ago they didn't care about anything with pesticides. So I always wondered, oh my God, I wonder what they did back then. But no, I agree. This way is a lot better.
Amazing we survived as kids, isn't it, Nita?
I know, it's crazy. It's funny.
If I may, Cliff here, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, early 80s, it was done by the state of New Jersey. There was a fishery biologist that would survey the lake for weeds, make a determination. The predominant chemical that they used was diquat.
Oh, okay. All right.
The treatment program started around 58, 59. And they used a variety, but I can remember swimming at the Byram Cove Club dock and getting sprayed by a helicopter.
Oh my God.
That's how bad it was back then from a regulatory viewpoint. But in the late 70s, early 80s, the state essentially said, we have no more money. We're not going to do this. Every lake is asking for it. And that was part of the basis of the decision to go to the harvesting in the 83, 84.
Okay. All right.
Okay, which is around when you guys came into the program.
Thank you, Cliff. So we're going to, I know there was a couple other questions and we will do our best to get those answers to you. We do have your contact information. We will be posting this video online if I did my job right of recording it. There might have been a slight glitch in the beginning, but we got most of Fred's information. We thank everyone for their participation and your interest. And remember, we could all do a little bit to help protect Lake Hopatcong. It's small little things like not using phosphorus, not picking up your dog poop. This is all what we teach the students on our field trips. So every little bit of change, using native plants, all of that helps. So let's all try to do our little part to help protect Lake Hopatcong. And if you see a piece of trash around the lake, feel free to pick it up. It's only going to end up in the lake anyway. So thank you all again for participating, and thank you, Fred, again for your time. We always appreciate it. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you too.
A pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Tom.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Fred.
everybody.
Thank you all.